Yeah. So here, me and Mom are here at Queen Mary, waiting for the tour to start at 12:05. So here is the gift shop. We just checked out their gift shop. Very nice gift shop. Hoodies and whatnot. You got the book. Ito, check natin to. Huh? Yeah. Ayaw naman niya eh. She doesn't, she prefers mall. You know how she is. She likes mall better than historical landmarks. Let's see, what's this? Poster? You want this one, Ma? It's a kind of like a sweatshirt slash hoodie. It said Queen.
Ayun, Queen.
Birdstone earrings. That's nice. How much are they charging?
This 50-foot breeze is an unscored mask. As we're passing by and all figures are Portside Marketplace, that was originally our first class library. On Sundays, that room of double as the Anglican chapel. Started shop right over here. Was originally our first class library.
Look, I think your model. You know. At the restaurant. Restaurant. And that's what's inside the ship. Although the sun glare doesn't really shows in my camera, I'm gonna videotape on the other side. Because of the sun, it's not showing in the camera too much. Britannia, 1840. Glory Days tour holding area. Queen Mary. First class children's playroom, late 1930s. So this is the place where it's rumored to be haunted. Laughter of kids and whatnot. So they said the playroom area is the most haunted one of all. And there are stories that sometimes they see kids inside this room, like playing. So this is the playroom. So you sometimes see ghosts, so you hear ghosts of children playing around. Well, if you're a kid, you can't be blamed for enjoying a playroom. I'm just waiting for my mom. I took her here because this is my second time here and she hasn't been. So I'm just waiting for her to finish up at that women's restroom. And if you go here, that's the Queen Salon. It's locked. And that is the meeting spot for the tour if you go all the way straight.
Started right this way.
Sunod ka sa akin, ma.
Please stand in by the windows for me. Get started right here. Step right over here by the windows for me. Come on in. All right, ladies and gentlemen, formal introduction. My name is Chris. I'm the chief officer here on board the ship. It is my pleasure to welcome you aboard for the Glory Days tour. Now, on this tour, we will cover the first class passenger experience, what it was like to travel aboard the ship, what it might have even been like to work on board the ship, or be a soldier carried aboard the ship. Now, before we get underway, I'd like to know how many of you are first-time visitors to the Queen Mary? Most of you, excellent. Glad to have you aboard. Welcome back if you are returning. Now, does anybody have a family member who has sailed on the Queen Mary? Every once in a while I get somebody. We carried well over 2 million passengers. Chances are you do know somebody who has a family member who has been on our ship. My mother was a passenger of the ship in 1962. My grandparents, 1937. The ship, she's in my family. She's in my blood. By the end of the tour, she's going to be in your family as well. Now, you are aboard the RMS Queen Mary.
RMS stands for Royal Mail Ship. We delivered the Royal Mail under contract with the British government. The plans for our ship started in 1926. Our construction began December 1st of 1930. We were built at the John Brown Shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland. 1 year and 10 days after construction started, everything stopped. This was due to the Great Depression. The Cunard Line ran out of cash. And so they went to the British government asking for financial assistance. The British government said yes, but you must merge with your chief rival, another ocean liner company that was also undergoing financial strain. That other company was known as the White Star Line. Why have you heard of the White Star Line?
Titanic.
They built the Titanic, indeed, the glorious grand ocean liner that was not supposed to meet her fate 18 years prior to our construction even beginning. And so the two companies did merge, forming Cunard White Star Limited. Construction on the ship resumed in early 1934. By September of that year, the ship was ready to be launched. Now, when a ship is launched, that's not the maiden voyage, that's just when she goes into the water for the first time. Construction lasts another year and a half. It's called the outfitting of the ship, where we put in the engines, the superstructure above, and all the beautiful decoration inside. Our maiden voyage was May 27th, 1936. We sailed from Southampton, England, made one stop at Cherbourg, France, before heading on to New York Harbor. That crossing of 3,400 miles took 5.5 days end to end. But back in the sailing days, there was a prize for the ship to make the record, the crossing the fastest. The crossing of the Atlantic is defined by a pair of lighthouses, 2,900 miles apart. The ship that can make it between those two earns what's called the Blue Riband, R-I-B-A-N-D. It's basically a large blue pennant you are allowed to fly off the back of your ship. It was expected we would earn the title on our maiden voyage. We did not. We ran into fog, we slowed down out of precaution. 6 voyages later, in August of 1936, we would claim the prize with a crossing time of 4 days, 27 minutes. The record holder before us was the French liner, the Normandy. She did not like losing her title. She took it back from us in 1937. We also did not like losing the title. In 1938, we modified the propellers to a more efficient design. We reclaimed the prize with a crossing time of 3 days, 21 hours, 48 minutes. A record we would hold for 14 years. Until the SS United States came into service in 1952, this was the world's fastest passenger ship. September of 1939, war is declared in Europe. We cannot return to England. We would have been a major target. And so we stayed in New York Harbor for months figuring out what to do with the Queen Mary. Do we scrap the ship and use the steel for the war effort? That would have seemed like a bit of a waste. We were only 3. So ultimately the decision was made to draft us into military service. Because of our immense size and speed, we made for an excellent troop transport. The entire ship was painted dull battleship gray for camouflage. That includes every single window and porthole so light wouldn't give us away at night. We sailed the world picking up soldiers everywhere we could, sailing under the nickname, the Grey Ghost. We went down to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, India, Africa. After 1941, we picked up soldiers here in America. By the end of the war, we had made 72 voyages, covering 600,000 miles. We carried 810,000 soldiers. Sir Winston Churchill said we were so valuable to World War II, we shortened the war by a year. We were so valuable to the war effort, Adolf Hitler had put a bounty on us. $250,000 payable to any submarine who could sink us and get us out of the way. Obviously nobody ever collected that prize. Now, at the end of the war in 1946, we had to bring everybody back home. This did not complete our military responsibilities, because once we brought the soldiers home, we had to go back to collect the new war brides, the women, the wives, the children of the American service members. It took 13 voyages to get all 22,000 of them back home. In July of 1947, we returned to our passenger life, and for the next 20 years, we ruled the North Atlantic as the most popular ocean liner of the day. 1958 began the era of the transatlantic jet. Air travel would soon put all of us large ships out of business. By 1963, more people were flying than sailing. By 1965, there would often be more crew members on board than passengers. By 1967, the Cunard Line was operating at a loss and decided to list all of their ocean liners for sale. The beautiful city of Long Beach offered the winning bid. The winning bid for the Queen Mary, $3,450,000. That's it. A steal, a fraction of her building cost. The trick, we had to get here. So on October 31st, 1967, we set sail from Southampton for the last time and headed south, with about 1,000 passengers on board, half our normal number of 2,000. Panama Canal in 1967 was 110 feet wide. We are 118. We were too wide to fit through the Panama Canal by 8 feet, and we had to go all the way down around South America and come all the way back up the other side. A 39-day voyage to Long Beach, with most of the 1,000 passengers still with us. Some of them flew home halfway through, said it's just too much. We arrived here December 9, 1967, started work on the Hotel Convention Center Museum and attraction you see today. We opened to the public in May of 1971. April 15th of 1993, we were honored to be added to the National Register of Historic Places with historic significance. Now that is a lot of history in a very short period of time. Before I continue on, does anybody have any questions so far? No? Fantastic. Follow me right up this way. Fit together. Every porthole, smokestack, cloud in the sky is its own individual piece of wood. We earned another nickname besides the Gray Ghost. We were known as the Ship of Beautiful Woods. 56 different varieties of wood are used to decorate the ship. 37 of them are on display here in this panel. To know which type of wood you're looking at, you start here at the bottom, count your way up and over the rays, head over to the chart on the side and count your way down. There are some very exotic sounding woods on board, from Caroba, Thuya, Zebrano, Hadouk, woods from around the world. Now, this panel is not original to our ship. Originally, there was a pair of elevator doors right here. But of the 22 elevators that we used to have on board the ship, we are only using 5 of them these days, including the 2 over on the port side, the matching set to this pair here. This panel was in the showroom of the company that supplied us with many of our woods. And in the 1980s, it was donated to us. Fits nicely here over what used to be the elevator doors. Now, there have been a few changes to this area since our sailing days. The flooring you are standing on is modern. It's linoleum. It's durable, but it's slippery. Not suitable for a ship of the North Atlantic. The original flooring was very similar in color and pattern, but it was more spongy. It was made out of rubber or cork. It's called corkoid or ruboleum. That allows you to dig in a little bit in rough weather so you didn't slide too much. Another change that has been made, in 1947, the leather paneling was installed over the original chestnut oak. The leather paneling brightens the room up and also cuts the echo down just a bit. Right, let's continue on forward. Tobacco, small souvenirs. Portside Marketplace was the first-class library and reading room. It also doubled as the Anglican chapel. Starboard shop was the drawing room, a nice room to retire to after a fine meal, to relax and withdraw from the noise of the ship. This was also the Catholic chapel for Sunday service. And behind me, the Centerline Boutique was the Austin Reed men's department store. A gentleman could get a nice fine suit or tie on board for his voyage. A gentleman in first class in the 1930s could carry upwards of 25 or 30 changes of clothes for a 5-day crossing. 5 to 6 outfits per day, depending on your activities. Unfortunately, ladies, you were out of luck. We did not sell women's clothes aboard the ship. Back in the 1930s, it was considered rude for 2 ladies to be seen wearing the same outfit. We didn't have enough room to stock that much variety, so your clothes would have been prepared prior to the voyage. Now there's another piece of artwork here in the main hall before we continue on. Above the Centerline Boutique, that is a piece known as a frieze. A frieze is a decorative band, usually lining the top of the wall or building. Our frieze is 50 feet in length. It is plaster and wax, designed to look like ivory. It is by Maurice Lambert, entitled Sport and Speed. Everything in this panel is in motion. Even the artwork suggests that we are a fast ship. Please, follow me right this way. Our ship. Now originally the playroom was a little bit wider, a little bit longer, and a little bit taller, going up to about 12 feet. And there was a slide along this wall from the top to the bottom of the room. That slide would have been a lot of fun in the rough North Atlantic waves, bouncing your way down. Now we had a full-time attendant on staff to take care of your kids so that you adults could also go play. The observation bar is a beautiful room to take in a view of the North Atlantic, provided the seas were nice and calm like they are today. In very rough weather, these doors were locked and nobody went past this point, because in the rough North Atlantic, the waves could reach these windows. We are 65 feet above the waterline. Gives you an idea of how rough the North Atlantic can get. Now we're going to be passing through the observation bar. It is an open, active bar. We are a large group, so we won't be able to stop inside. We're just going to continue out the other side. But there's some artwork to look for as we pass through. The first thing you will notice, the silver metal handrail or balustrade going around the room. It's aluminum by Austin Crompton Roberts, featuring mythical beasts and beer barrels. The bar itself is also in the shape of a large beer barrel. The wood used in the bar is Makassar ebony from Indonesia. And above the bar is a mural entitled Royal Jubilee Week. It celebrates King George V's 25th year as king. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay together. Follow me right this way. So ladies and gentlemen, we are out here on the Promenade deck. The Promenade deck used to go all the way around the ship. It was 1/4 mile to do a complete lap. But you can no longer go all the way around. If you look ahead, Spencer Tracy is blocking our path. That is the observation bar that has been expanded out onto this decking here in Long Beach. Now, this was 1/4 mile, as I mentioned. You could get up in the morning, do your 4 laps, and get your mile walk in for the day. Not all of our passengers have been content to stroll the promenade. In 1936, when the ship was undergoing her speed trials to see how fast we could really go, one of our invited guests, David Exeter, Lord Burleigh, he ran the entire 1/4 mile in under 60 seconds in his tuxedo and dress shoes. He was an Olympic sprinter, and so we invited the world's fastest man to run on the world's fastest ship. Now, the decking you are standing on is the original wood surface. It is Burmese teak, very durable, very long-lasting. All we've done to it here in California is varnish it to keep it from drying out in the sun. Burmese teak is chosen because when it's not varnished, it is relatively non-skid. It's also high in oil content, makes it impervious to insect and fire damage. Now, you may feel a bit off balance here on the promenade. The decking is not level on purpose. It's not sinking in the middle of the ship. It is higher at the ends and is lower in the center in what is called shear to deck. It's a curve we build into the hull to let the ship flex and bend in the rough North Atlantic. As you went over a wave, you had to bend along with it or risk snapping. If you want to see some of the construction of the ship, just look above you. We are not welded together, we are held together by rivets. Rivets are the small bumps that you see. They are bolts essentially placed by 2 people, one on each side of the steel. Rivets have just enough give so the ship can flex. There are over 10 million of them holding us together. Ladies and gentlemen, right this way. I mentioned you can take photographs anywhere you'd like. So if you have a camera and have not used it yet, get it ready. This is the room you want to use it in.
Nice. Wow, look at that. Wow, look, they got their own fireplace.
Okay.
Yeah. Look at that, that's gorgeous. They got their own theater also, look.
That's the church.
Man, that is so beautiful.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first class main passenger lounge. Back in the sailing days, large overstuffed chairs filled the room, built-in carpets covered the floor. In the evening, all of that would be pushed aside, exposing the beautiful oak, mahogany, and laurelwood parquet floor you see here by the fireplace. Like I mentioned, we had over 2 million passengers, 800,000 soldiers, 22,000 war brides, and over 50 million visitors here to Long Beach. This is all of the original flooring in this room that has survived. Everything else has been replaced. Now you notice there are 3 fireplaces in the room. They are electric. They always have been. Fire and ships do not get along, so we limited the number of fires we had on board. Now the mantle of the fireplace, as well as all 8 of the beautiful lighting urns around the room, they're all cut from the same block of gold and onyx. A beautiful stone quarried from the same block, so it has the same color and grain throughout the entire room. Now the theme of this room is music. If you look above all 4 of the original entryway doors, as well as above the stage, you see bronzes entitled Symphony. The artist is Maurice Lambert, the same artist who did the frieze in the main hall. Over the 2 central fireplaces, next to the rose-colored glass mirrors, you see etched glass panels, also very musical in their theme. And here on the forward bulkhead over the main fireplace, my favorite piece of art on board the entire ship, a piece called Unicorns in Battle by Alfred J. Oakley and Gilbert Bays. If you know your mythology, you know what the music is. Legend has it when unicorns fight and their horns touch, the most beautiful music can be heard. Now up above you see there are 5 holes someone has cut in my favorite piece of artwork, turning this room into the first-class movie theater. This was the cinema. There's a projector room on the other side of those windows. We would drop a screen on the stage and show movies to our first-class passengers. On the stage, there would be an organ recital during the day, a live band playing at night. The ship had a public address system, the first of its kind, so a performance in here could be broadcast to the rest of the ship, so second and third class could listen in. Our final peacetime voyage in September of 1939, tensions were running high on the ship as everybody was getting out of Europe before war was declared. Captain recognized everybody was a bit uncomfortable and asked one of our passengers to get up on the stage and entertain the room. It was comedian Bob Hope, just happened to have been a passenger on that last voyage. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you guys a moment to look around the room, explore. There's 2 beautiful bronze statuettes over on the far side. Take a nice close look at them. In just a moment, we'll be heading back out the same door. Welcome to the first-class Gentlemen's Smoking Lounge. Originally designed in 1936 to be men only, after the war, we allowed ladies to join the gentlemen in here. This is decorated like a typical English country cottage. Oak. Pollard oak, brown oak, and tiger oak lines the walls. The fireplace, the travertine marble, this is the only real working fireplace on board the entire ship. We burned coal here. The reason for a real fire in this room is it creates a draft and helps clear the smoke out of the room, bringing it up the flue. There are 2 paintings in the room by the same artist, Edward Wadsworth. This one is called Dressed Overall at the Quay. When a ship is dressed, that means she's wearing all of her signal flags. This piece is called At Sea. It is very symbolic, very surrealist. This piece is over a pantry, a warming station for the stewards. Hot coffee or tea would be served right there. There was a refrigerator underneath for cold snacks. If you wanted something a little stronger, there was a stand-up style American bar right over here on the side. Now, there are 2 wood carvings right here by James Woodford, pierced limewood carvings. They show nautical life here. There's a 3rd one around the corner that shows shipboard activities, games, recreation. Now you see up at the top there is a clock mounted to the top of the wall. It is still correct, it is still working, but as we sailed, we had to change time zones as we sailed across the Atlantic. Who can reach that clock to change it? None of us. So at the stroke of midnight, every day, we would adjust the master clock up in the bridge, and every single other clock mounted to the ship would adjust itself along with it. That's about 700 clocks. That would take a while to do by hand, and so we didn't. During World War II, this room became a hospital. About 80 bunks were in here for the injured. 16 for women, 16 for critically injured, and the rest for men. just in this one room. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, please take a look around. We'll head out in just a moment.
That's nice. Antique na ito. Ito sa ano nila, preserve.
Yeah.
Weddings were not performed at sea under British law. We are no longer under British law. We do now perform weddings on board. In fact, we had one this morning. And so we have turned the second class smoking lounge into our wedding chapel. All right, we have one more stop. We're going out the door and up one level. So please watch your step right this way.
Carnival.
Ma, sa mo ito?
Doon tayo sa dulo.
Wow! It's just a what? I got it! I got it! I can check you when you're done. It's a
So ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, we did not perform weddings on board the ship back in our sailing days, but we do now. The gazebo you see right here used to be our tennis court. And now we've put a wedding gazebo on it and offers beautiful views out into the harbor. Now, just to the side of us, you can see the town of Long Beach. Long Beach used to be a very long beach. You can see the sand going all the way up to about the marina. The beach used to continue all the way along, but in 1967 the marina was built. We came here, kind of revitalized the city of Long Beach. On a clear day, you can see all the way to the Hollywood sign. It is not a clear day today. It's nice and hazy here at the Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to head inside for our last stop. Please do watch your step right this way. In here. Come on in right up here to the upper landing. I'm going to let you guys look around in just a moment. She was just mopping the floor over there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Veranda Grill. This was the first class nightclub. It was either the Veranda Grill during the day or the Starlight Lounge at night. This is where first class passengers went to get away from other first class passengers. This was the exclusive nightclub, and you had to pay a little extra just to come in here. And it was so exclusive you were only allowed in here once per voyage. So a 5-day crossing, you only get one night in here. Now we had some very notable guests. Walt Disney had a regular table right over here where you're standing because he liked the way New York looked at night when the ship returned. Henry Ford Jr. had a table over on this side, and it is from that table he spotted his future wife dancing on the dance floor down below. And every time they traveled aboard, they said it wasn't a proper voyage unless they dined at that same table. Now the theme of this room is entertainment, and this room is very different from every other space on board because there's no woodwork as the primary feature. It's all white walls, murals, and black carpeting. The black carpeting was the choice of the designer of the room. Her name was Doris Zinkiezen. She was a Scottish set decorator. She requested black carpeting because it's easier to change out if it gets stained. Also, she knew the gentlemen coming up here would be wearing their white tuxedos or black dinner jackets, and they would look fantastic. They'd match. Ladies could wear any color dress they wanted, and they would stand out and look fantastic. This room was decorated perfectly. Now the columns, Doris Zinkiezen also painted those, and the main mural right here. The pieces are called entertainment. They show circus and performer life. This piece, unfortunately, was damaged in World War II, not by any enemy action, but because this is the room that all the gunnery officers used as their office. So the people in charge of protecting the ship. This was covered in burlap, and they saw this wall and tacked all their maps to it. At the end of the war, the burlap was taken down, this piece was destroyed by pinholes, and so Doris was requested to come back and repaint it. And so this goes back to 1947, not 1936 like the columns. So ladies and gentlemen, before I let you go to look around this room and explore just a bit, does anybody have any questions for me about this beautiful ship or any place that we've gone? Yes?
Why was the kids' room?
Why was the kids' room minimized? It's had a few different uses throughout the years. It was a t-shirt store for a while, and they knocked out some walls and shortened it. Also brought the ceiling down so we could put in lighting and air conditioning. But yes, it was a much bigger room back in the day. Any other questions? Yes?
What separated you, like as first class, second, just depending on how much money you have? Or?
Correct. And between the sections of the ship, there would be gates so that you couldn't wander as second and third class. You couldn't wander into first class. They would check your tickets at every stop. First class, they were allowed to go anywhere on the ship they wanted. So first class could go all over the ship. And it's often said that first class guests would leave their parties in first class to go into second class because they were having more fun. It wasn't quite as formal. So yeah, first class could wander the ship, second and third had to stay at their ends. Good question. Any others? Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to let you look around this room. I want you to stay in this room. That side of the floor is wet where she was just mopping, so you can go down here and take a better look at the mural or cut straight across. Just stay in this room. We're going to be heading out here in just a moment. If you have any other questions, I'll be right by the doorway. Otherwise, on behalf of the RMS Queen Mary, thank you guys so much for coming aboard. Please enjoy the rest of your stay with us today. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
No, it's wet.
Yeah, but over here, come on.
Aber ich glaube nicht, was glaubst du, werden wir den ersten Pass diese Nebel sehen? Weil haben wir ja nicht.
Encountering stairs, so I don't want anybody to trip, so just watch where you're going, make sure you don't misstep or anything like that. And please, oh, there we go, that's the last of R9. Anyway, so also please feel going through are pretty cool, so snap away. We'll go ahead and get started. We're going to be heading down toward boiler rooms, but that does require us to get down to A deck first, right this way. So before we even continue on into the engineering spaces, there is an engineering feat that you can see right here on A deck. If you turn and look down the corridor, you'll notice that once the main cart moves, you won't be able to see the other end of the corridor because of that very distinct curve to the deck. That's actually intentional. It is called shear to deck. So it means that all of the interior decks of our ship have a curve to them to match the curve of the outside. It gave her extra flexibility as she was crossing the Atlantic. It allowed her to bend and flex without warping any of the flooring. Now, they don't really design cruise ships like this today because it's a huge pain. It means that none of the doors or windows are the same size or shape as each other. So everything is custom built to the angle of the deck. It's right this way. It's called the Cunard story, and it covers the company history of the company that originally owned the Queen Mary. Okay, our elevator is here, right this way. We're waiting on just a couple of people. That we had on board. It was like a big haunted maze type thing that ran throughout the ship, and it ran through the boiler rooms, so we still have some of the leftover paint up, as well as some of the fake cobwebs. So that's what you're going to be seeing when the doors open down below. Nice. So you will, when we reach the bottom, see a sign in boiler room 2 that says we're 36 feet below sea level, or 6 fathoms. We're actually more like 21 feet below sea level. We sit a little bit higher in the water than we used to. Plus, we're walking on this concrete walkway that wasn't here originally. So I'd just like to stop and give everybody a chance to take a look at this, because it gives you a good idea of how our boiler rooms were set up. Plus, this is a good stopping point for me to cover a little bit of the history of the ship before we start digging into the engineering portion. Throughout the tour, if you folks have any questions, please feel free to ask. Although keep in mind that I am not an engineer. In fact, I switched my major from engineering because I hate math. So just keep that in mind if you have questions to ask. I'll do my best to answer them, but if they're really technical, you're probably going to get guesswork. But the Queen Mary was originally owned and operated by the Cunard line. And since 1839, Cunard had an agreement with the British government to haul mail back and forth from Europe to North America. This is what gave her the title RMS Queen Mary. It stood for Royal Mail Ship or Royal Mail Service. The plans to build this ship began in 1926, and she and her sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth, were going to be the two largest and fastest passenger liners in the world. This ship would set sail on May 27th, 1936, and she would continue passenger service from Southampton, England to New York City with a short stop in France to drop off mail. It only took her about 4 to 5 days to cross the Atlantic, and she would be so fast that she would actually earn the Blue Ribbon, or the Blue Ribbon Prize, awarded to the fastest ship in the seas. 1939, her peacetime service was cut short due to World War II, and eventually she would actually be drafted into war service and would serve as a troop carrier, hospital ship, and bride and baby shuttle. Due to her immense speed and the gray color that she was painted during the war, it made her pretty much uncatchable, and that would earn her the nickname the Gray Ghost. And the Emperor of Japan, as well as Hitler, put out a bounty on this ship of $250,000 plus the Iron Cross oak leaves. But by the time a German U-boat spotted us, lined up their shot, and fired, we were already long gone thanks to our engineering. Wartime service completed, the Queen Mary got restored to her former elegance. She would sail for another 20 years, known as the stateliest ship on the seas. But by the 60s, all passenger liners were losing money. The Queen Mary was no exception, so she was retired and auctioned off. Normally, she would have gone to a scrapyard, but the highest of the bids came from the city of Long Beach at $3.45 million. So that's how she ended up here. She would arrive here December 9th, 1967, and we would convert her to what you see today: floating hotel, tourist attraction, convention center. And we would open our doors to the public in 1971. And then in 1993, we would get placed on something called the National Register of Historic Places with Historic Significance. Which means if any of the original material you see while you're walking around today breaks or wears out, we actually have to find that same type of material in order to make replacements. So it makes it kind of difficult. The Queen Mary has been part of Long Beach's history longer than she ever sailed. She sailed for about 31 years, and December 9th marked the 52nd anniversary of the Queen Mary's arrival in Long Beach. So we're starting in on her 53rd year with us. So there you go, folks. Timeline of the ship. You will probably get more questions answered if you take the Glory Days history tour later on today. But before we get moving on, are there any questions?
I'm a glory kind of guy. How many people died down here?
We actually don't have anybody, we don't have record at least of anybody dying down here.
Isn't there like where they kept all the patients or people who were sick? Wasn't it down here somewhere?
No, that was up on B deck. That was the isolation ward, but it didn't end up getting used as the isolation ward all that often because we didn't have that many sick people travel on board.
How many people just jumped off deck?
I don't have a number on that one.
So nobody died down here?
No, not that we're aware of.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
All right, great this thing. We used to have this special effect tour run through here, Ghosts and Legends. So this section was used to simulate a whole breach, like there was water flooding the ship. So this water is that leftover special effect. So the bulkheads or walls that you see here are actually not the original ones, but if you look up closer towards the ceiling, that is the original bulkhead down there. So we built kind of a false wall in order to have tanks that would then fill up this room. So we are currently standing in what's called the water softening plant. If you look over here, this gives you kind of an idea of what the room looked like originally. This space was used to treat all the water that the Queen Mary was using. So we would have treated 700 tons of fresh water daily, and that water would have been going towards drinking water as well as water being used in our 24 water tube boilers. We needed to distill that water as much as possible because if there were any minerals left in the water, it would cause buildup in the pipes and potentially cause it to fail. And we didn't want that to happen, so it was imperative that we clean that water up as much as possible. We also treated 25 tons of ocean water in here every hour.
What kind of water? I'm sorry.
Ocean.
Oh, ocean.
Ocean water, yeah.
I just said abortion.
No, ocean water, so salt water. We couldn't really take the salt water convert it all the way into fresh, drinkable water, but we couldn't clean it up enough to be used for what was called sanitary salt water, and that actually would have been used in our plumbing as well as for swabbing the decks and things like that. I don't know if any of you folks happen to be hotel guests, but if you are, you've probably noticed that in the bathrooms there are 4 different taps in the bath: hot and cold fresh water, hot and cold salt water. And that is because the Queen Mary had to carry all of her fresh water with her as she was sailing, and we didn't want to run out of it because people kept showering in it. So we encouraged people to shower in the sanitary salt water and then rinse quickly in the fresh. So that was another use for the sanitary salt water treated in this room. We would have treated this water using both a quartz-based and a lime-based filtering system. We'll go ahead and continue on.
Parang may nakita akong tao dun.
Hindi ko lang.
You've probably noticed that the front of the ship kind of comes in at a point. So the shape of the ship did mean this room became a little bit smaller. So it used a different kind of boiler than the ones used in the rest of the boiler rooms. This used a double-ended Scotch boiler. They were 17.5 feet in diameter and 22 feet long. And the rest of our boilers would have had 6 boilers in them each, but because this one was smaller, it only had 3. This was an older design of boiler, and it was obviously cylindrical in shape, and it weighed about 9 pounds. Now, if you look up above us, you can see some ductwork here, and on the side here. That is left over from the closed stokehold system. So the Queen Mary wanted to burn their fuel as efficiently as possible. So all of these rooms were actually pressurized. So if you look over here, you can actually see an airlock. So if you wanted to transition between boiler rooms, you would have transitioned in airlocks so as to keep the pressure. This closed stokehold system were basically kind of giant draft fans that forced air into this room, and air tried to find the easiest route to escape, and that meant trying to escape via the fire that was boiling water to create steam, burning our fuel. We'll go ahead and continue on.
These are all blocked off? Do they have doors to come through? Or?
Yeah, so these big open spaces that you see here would not have been here originally. The reason they're all cut out the way they are is because when the ship was retired, the agreement with Cunard, the company that owned our ship, was that she would never again sail under her own steam. So we had to convert her to a floating building. And that required us to remove all of her boilers, one of her engine rooms, and 3 out of her 4 propellers. And in order to lift all the pieces of the boilers out of this space, we had to cut out these walls here, as well as shear off the stacks at the top of the ship so that we could lift out the boiler pieces through those empty spaces. So the stacks that you see at the top aren't actually the original. They're replicas of what would have been there originally. However, funnily enough, they have been there longer than the original stacks, because they've been there for over 52 years versus the original ones that were there for 31.
So it was, I guess it was a simulation.
Yeah, so if you're looking over the side, you can see these kind of sleds, and that's where the boilers would have been mounted.
Ang laki nito, no? Grabe.
That's huge.
Yeah. The boilers here were cube-shaped yarrow boilers, which were 23 feet by 23 feet by 23 feet. So it was pretty big. If you worked in here, you had to be a pretty tough individual. First of all, you had to be okay with heights. If you look kind of straight above us here, as well as off to the side, you could see some of those original catwalks that people were walking on. You can see another one right back here on the wall. Yeah, so as you can see, they're very narrow, and they go all the way to the ceiling. Wow. Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, so the people working down here generally probably would have been smaller in stature. Probably also would have had to have really good balance, because you definitely didn't want to fall off this thing.
Look at the tiny little ladder.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Sounds like something that your kid uses to go up on a bunk bed.
Yeah, it does. So you had to deal with those heights and the narrow walkways, and you had to deal with the heat down here. Depending on the season you were sailing in, the temperature down here could be from about 92 degrees to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. You would have had to work in those warm temperatures in long sleeves and long pants, because if you were to bump into a pipe unprotected, you would have burned yourself pretty badly. You also had to wear these special wooden-soled shoes, because if we wore the rubber soles like we all are today, the heat would have actually started to corrode the rubber over the course of your shifts in this space.
So you got hot feet.
Yeah. That's also why the walkways are slatted versus just a flat one. We do get the question a lot with, especially if it's younger kids on the tour, asking why it looks like a sideways ladder. And that's because if we had just had a flat surface, it basically would have acted as a frying pan with all the heat in this space. So the slats allowed the heat to kind of go through.
Well, there's baby top down or something like that. That had serious money.
Surprisingly, they did not get paid all that well. Usually the people working down here were working down here because they were passionate about what they did. And then as far as shifts went, you would have worked 4 hours, had 8 hours off, worked another 4 hours. Which doesn't sound too bad, but if you worked much longer than 4 hours, it was so taxing down here between the pressure, which wasn't too bad, but it kind of was the same deal as when you're flying in an airplane and you have to pop your ears. The heat, as I mentioned, down here, as well as the noise level, it was so loud down here because of the roar of the fires and the boilers that you could walk up to somebody and yell as loud as you could, and they would still have no idea what you were trying to say to them.
Wow.
So you had to put up with all of that, and then you also had to be cautious about the steam itself, because when it was, if there was a leak, it was so hot and pressurized that it would take about 10 feet away from the pipe before any sort of visible cloud started to form. Stumble into that unprotected, and to prevent that from happening, men would be armed with a broom that they held out in front of them, and then when the bristles at the end of the broom started to move, they knew that they had encountered a leak and then could set about repairing it.
That's good.
You'll also notice on the walls that we have these black streaks coming down. So that's not paint, that's actually leftover fuel. So the Queen Mary was not coal-fired like the Titanic. We used something called bunker seed fuel oil. So it's all the molasses-like stuff at the bottom of a barrel of oil when you're done refining it. And you actually had to heat it up to, I think, 700 degrees just to pump it through the pipes to make it liquid enough to use. And it was really hard to pump it all out of our system, so we actually still have a lot of it floating around in the pipes. And those black streaks are where the fuel has kind of started to leak through over the years.
It's not fun.
No, not anymore.
Did anybody try to light it?
I hope not.
Make sure it wasn't flammable.
As far as I know.
Well, none of the devil light, so we go.
Okay, good.
This is something original? This little thing right here is original? I don't want to touch it.
power coming from boiler room 1, so the first boiler room that we came through, would have been coming here as well as to the aft turbo generator room. This room supplied all of the electricity for the passenger areas of the ship, so it would have ran the lights, the elevators, the kitchens, anything that would have been used to make our guests feel comfortable. That's what would have been pumped out in here. This would have been producing about 1,300 kilowatts per hour. We also had another turbo generator room further back, and combined, the two of them would have produced about 9,100 kilowatts. That is about enough to power a city of 100,000. So, today, that number doesn't sound very impressive because we're used to cities of like 500,000 to 1 million people.
That's like a zip code.
But one of my coworkers likes to put it in these terms. There was enough power coming out of this room into the lights back up in the passenger areas that when you were walking around Main Hall, which is where Tour Center is, where you checked in, you could actually hear the lights humming because of all of the electric power being pumped out here. Here, right this way.
I wonder if I was faster.
Yeah! Original catwalks. They're a little bit easier to see in here because they're closed. Burning our fuel exited these spaces. Boilers 1 and 2 would have gone through the forward smokestack. 3 is sitting inside of the ship. We would have been about 21 feet below that. Yeah, when we were in the boilers. As far as I know, we have never had a leak from the outside of the ship. It's all been internal stuff from plumbing getting old.
So how long would it take us if we had a leak? Very slowly.
It depends on how big the leak was. I don't think it would have been too much of a problem unless we were like torpedoed, but I don't think that's very likely these days.
When you deep sea dive, you only go about 15 feet on the first time.
You'll also notice that some of the rivets that are used to hold the Queen Mary together, some of them are kind of flat and flush to the side of the ship, and some of them further up stick further out. We're still not entirely sure why that design happens. We think maybe it has something to do with reducing the drag of the water on the lower decks. Yeah. That's, we think, also why a lot of the panels are overlapped, is to minimize the amount of drag. Yep, 21.
Somebody would take the gun check.
The Queen Mary's original anchors. This is actually her spare anchor. This weighs about 16 tons. Apparently would not have been kept on the ship. It would have been kept in port in case one of her other ones was lost. We're going to go ahead and continue down the stairs here into the engine room. Just watch.
Now how far are we going underwater?
We're not underwater right now, but we will be when we go into the engine room. I think it'll be about the same as the boiler rooms.
22.
Yeah, 21. Yeah.
21 feet under seawater. My ears are popping.
No, this is a different area. Earlier, we're in the front of the ship. This is the engine area.
Now that we're here in the engine room, I'm going to show you how it was used. pumped back here to the engine room via the high pressure head steam pipes that you see here on either side. And then it would have come through here, high pressure head, into the high pressure head turbine. We would then slow down the power of that steam and kind of harness it, and it would move into the first intermediate pressure head turbine. The same process would happen there, and then it would snake around and come here to the low pressure head and the stern turbine. So the second intermediate pressure head and high pressure astern, these ones are actually the same thing. We have 2 engines in this space, so we would have had 4 engines total, 1 for each of our propellers, and it would have been 2 per engine room. So basically these 2 sides are just mirrors of each other. The reason that one is red and this one is black is just because we took the heat shield off of that one. So the steam would snake its way through, come here to the second intermediate pressure head turbine, and then it would go further back into our other sections of the engine room, which we'll get to when we get down there. We could put the ship into reverse, and that's where a high pressure stern turbine would come in handy. So there's 2-in-1 combination for these, where you see the pipe kind of coming out at a right angle here. That would have been the astern turbine, and that's where the steam would have gone to put the ship into reverse.
Do you know the material that the turbine was made out of?
I believe it's been manganese bronze, because that's what we use for our propeller shaft and propellers.
Wow. Money. And all those pressurized pipes, all that electricity came from that.
It would have been the one that we saw, and then there was another one that got removed in the process of converting this whole space into a museum area. So it would have been 2 rooms. So this is the control panel. This is where all the communication happened for the engine rooms. The things marked F, those were telegraphs. So there is an identical set up at the bridge if you folks go and visit up there. And you could operate the propellers at different speeds. I don't know if we ever did, but it was possible. And the way these telegraphs worked is that the people up at the bridge would move the handle of their telegraph to the speed they wanted the propeller to go. So as you can see over here, they are signaling that the port inner propeller needs to be going at dead slow speed. So this little green arrow would move down here to match where the handle at the bridge was. Then the folks down here would open or close the valve depending on how much steam they needed, how fast they were going, and once the correction was made, they would then move their handle to match this green dead slow arrow. And then the green arrow up at the bridge would move to match the dead slow as well. And that would indicate to the bridge that their orders had been followed. You'll see another telegraph here right in front, and that was used to communicate with the boiler rooms. So as you can see, there's excessive white smoke and excessive black smoke, and that has to do with how efficiently we were burning our fuel. We wanted to make sure that we were burning the correct mixture of air and fuel. So if it was excessive black smoke, we were burning too much of our fuel, we were burning it too fast. If there was excessive white smoke, then we were burning too much air and not enough fuel. So it was just trying to find that balance, and the engineers in the boiler room would make their necessary corrections as well.
Question.
Yes?
What's that big red thing up there?
That would have indicated how far the ship was yawing or leaning one side to the other.
Okay. Make sure you steady.
Yeah, as stable as possible.
Too much pressure on one side.
And then they were able to communicate with these phones?
Yes, so these are called louda-phones. They're basically telephones, but they were specially fitted to cancel out the excess engineering noise in here. So those would have been used if the bridge had a more complicated order to give out instead of just go fast or go slow. So if it was more complicated than that, then they would have used those telephones.
They've been doing noise reduction forever. So we thought this was some new thing for noise reduction in your car. You got noise reduction in your phone. You thought this was like new stuff. It's been going up since.
Yeah, since the 1930s at least.
Ain't that a trip?
Here, we'll go down the stairs here.
How far we going up now?
Yeah, when we reach the walkway down here, we'll be at that 21-foot level again.
Walk around the water.
At a certain speed, you don't have to pump your legs at that speed. Although this one actually would have been used in reverse because we weren't trying to speed up our propellers more because they could only handle going at a certain speed before they started to warp and get damaged. So this actually would have harnessed that really, really fast speed and then slowed it down back for our propellers. And this used a herringbone pattern to make it easier for the gears to lock together as they were turning. And this would have been filled with mineral oil. So this whole engineering space only would have taken about 5 to 6 engineers to operate it. One of the positions was called a greaser, and they were the folks that worked down here to make sure everything stayed oiled and was running smoothly. And it would be their job to make sure that there was enough mineral oil in here that it wasn't causing any friction or anything like that. As we're heading back, if you look up in either side here, you can see some of the little turbine blades. So right here. This was a turning gear. This was used to warm up or cool down the ship just to make sure that the propeller shaft through this area didn't sag or warp because of the heat difference. It turned pretty slow. As you can see here, it only turned once about every 10 minutes. You'll also course of her career. And actually our first set of propellers were a lot larger than the one you see here, but it created such a vibration in the ship that they switched to the smaller propeller. This is about 18 feet in diameter, and it weighs about 32 tons. It's made out of manganese bronze, and the company promise was that it was so perfectly balanced that when the ship was dry docked, you could tap one of the blades and it would complete a full rotation.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's try it.
Well, we can't anymore because there's water in there. But to give you guys a little bit of reference for how large the propeller is, since it's hard to tell, that fairing cone here is what is attaching the propeller out here. Right this way.
Wow.
That's the propeller. It's a big one.
As you can see, people have turned this into a wishing light.
Yeah.
We wish they wouldn't. We specifically built this big shadow box around the outside so that we can suspend the propeller in fresh water because the minerals in the salt water were causing corrosion to the propeller. But the change people keep tossing in there causes more corrosion than if we had just left it sitting in the salt water. We did go in last year and clean it all out. We donated several trash cans worth of change to Ronald McDonald's charity house, and we also found 12 cell phones down there. sledge wrench. It's also known as the propeller securing nut wrench. Back by the fairing cone, you saw that big nut, which would have been holding the propeller onto the ship. This is what was used to secure the securing nut. The reason we also call it a sledge wrench is because it would have taken several men using sledgehammers hammering on the wrench in order to make it tighten the securing nut. So as you can see here, we have kind of a slopey side, so you can see where it got hammered down over the years of use. All right, right this way.
That's original.
Yes. I don't know if it's original to the ship, but it's 1936 era. So, before we wrapped up, I wanted to give you an idea of just how much we covered on this tour. So we started kind of in this area on M deck. We walked all the way forward to A deck here, and then we came all the way down through our parking garage into the water softening plant that you see here. And then we worked our way through boiler room 1, boiler room 2, the turbo generator room, and boiler room 3. Then we came back up and over, and then walked all the way back to engine room number 2 that you see here. We did our whole walk around in here, and then we walked along the length of the propeller shaft down here and came out at 180 over here, our propeller. And now we're back here somewhere, right about here at the second class swimming pool. So congratulations, folks. In an hour, you walked pretty much the full 1,019 and a half feet of the Queen Mary.
Woo! Yep. You made it fun. You made it fun. Bravo.
Thank you all so much for coming to the Queen Mary and for taking Steam and Steel. I also want to thank you for being patient with me. This is only the second time that I've done this tour. You folks have access to the engine room if you want to go back and read some of those plaques in more detail. The next 4D showing, which comes included with your ticket, will be at 2:30. And then you also have access to the Winston Churchill exhibit right behind us here. Otherwise, if you're looking to get to your other tour, you'll go back out the glass doors and across the bridge with you down. Any other questions or directions? I'll be here a few minutes. Otherwise, you're free to go. I'll be having
Got a question. What is
yes.
the second? Was it the first class swimming pool? Because you said second class swimming pool.
Yeah.
So what was the difference between the classes of swimming pools? Was it per capita or what was it?
Just that first class passengers were allowed to use the first or second class pool, but second class passengers were only allowed to use the second class swimming pool.
So did you have like a third class? Because that's probably where I would want.
We did not have a third class swimming pool, although eventually in the 60s we did reach the agreement that third class could use the first class swimming pool while first class passengers were at T. Then the pool would be drained, cleaned, and refilled.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That was crazy. Drained, filled again because of BB poop. That's crazy. Wow, how long did that take? What, a couple of hours?
It actually didn't take that long. I think at most it was half an hour.
And what was it, salt water?
Yeah, and we had condensers in the engine room that were filled with these tiny little tubes filled with freezing seawater. So then the steam, once it got used, could go into those condensers and cool back down to water and then be reused. So eventually, though, all of those little tubes filled with water would heat up and the ocean water would be too warm to cool down the steam, and then that would get used in our swimming pools.
So they got the chance to use the water anyway, just a little filter. It was all recycled.
Yeah, we recycled as much as we can.
You still swim third class.
Hauntings. If you have a cell phone, it would be greatly appreciated if you turn those to a silent setting so they do not interrupt the tour. And if you brought a camera, feel free to take pictures along the way. But as we make our way throughout the ship, please try and stay together. The Queen Mary is a large, confusing ship, and sometimes people do go missing. As long as we stay together, that should not be an issue. In short, if I am walking, you should be walking. If at any point I start to run, try to keep up. And we'll begin our tour in the Mauritania room, one deck below. Please follow me.
You ready?
Right here.
This is not the Haunted Mansion. So again, welcome aboard the Queen Mary. In case you missed it upstairs, my name is Daniel. Before we get into the hauntings on board, we are going to cover a brief general history of the ship to give you enough background to understand the stories I'll share with you today. Now, the Queen Mary was originally owned and operated by the Cunard Line, made her maiden voyage May 27, 1936, out of Southampton, England, bound for New York. As one of the largest, fastest, most luxurious ocean liners, she counted kings, queens, other royalty, celebrities of every kind among her many passengers. With the outbreak of the Second World War, she was drafted into service as a troop ship, repainted a battleship gray and nicknamed the Gray Ghost. She made 72 wartime crossings, sailed over 600,000 miles, and transported just over 800,000 troops. Her role in the war effort was so vital, Hitler offered a $250,000 bounty to the captain who could sink her. But she never came under attack, never fired a gun in anger, never lost a soul on board due to enemy action. And at the completion of her troop transport service, the Queen Mary would be utilized as part of Operation Diaper, transporting war brides and children to the United States. And then following a 10-month refitting, she returned to passenger service in July of 1947 and served as a luxury liner for another 20 years. But by the mid-1960s, jet air travel was taking over her route, and the Queen Mary was showing a loss for Cunard. In 1967, Cunard decided to retire the ship. They put her up for auction, and the highest bid came from the city of Long Beach, California. That bid was $3,450,000. That is why the Queen Mary ended up here of all places. She has now been here in Long Beach for 52 years, and this May will mark the 84th anniversary of her maiden voyage. But throughout the years, there have been stories, reports, rumors, and whispers in the dark that this ship is haunted. Today, the Queen Mary is listed by Time magazine as one of the 10 most haunted places on Earth. According to that list, she is number 6. And I know it's not as impressive as being number 1, but not everyone can be the Amityville house. Because the Queen Mary does have this reputation for being haunted, we do get a lot of guests on board with an interest in our hauntings. We do get asked a lot of questions about them. Questions like, why is the Queen Mary haunted? Well, the simplest answer to that question is we don't know. We don't fully understand what exactly has caused the hauntings on board. Even those in the paranormal research field have differing opinions on theories behind our hauntings. We get psychic investigators on board. Despite individual findings throughout the ship, one thing they do tend to agree on is that there is a vortex on board, a sort of gateway between our world and the next that has allowed several of our ghostly inhabitants onto the ship. So that's one theory. But another theory submitted by parapsychologists is that many of the hauntings on board the ship could be residual energies. Primarily believed to be energies from past events that occurred on board the ship. These energies have attached to their surroundings and now repeat over and over again. But the big theory behind many of the theories throughout the Queen Mary and her hauntings is that they may stem from the deaths that occurred on board. In our research of the ship, we have located records for just over 70 deaths on board this ship. Now, they were the result of illness, old age, accidents, war wounds, suicides, murder. Many people do believe that a little girl drowned in one of our swimming pools, but there is no record of a drowning on board. However, it does appear that during our paranormal investigation tours, where we are actively searching for evidence of our hauntings, that the areas we get our best findings in are in the areas where sudden, horrible, violent, untimely deaths occurred on board this ship. Now again, we don't know if these are the answers for why the ship is haunted, just some of the theories that have been offered. Now, another question that I get asked on a daily basis is if I have ever seen a ghost on board. I've worked on board the ship going on 14 years and can tell you that I've seen things, heard things, and felt things on board that I cannot explain. And usually the next question I get asked is, what did you see? So during the tour, I will be sharing with you a couple of my own encounters. I've also had a lot of guests ask if I am a ghost. I am not. Please do not poke me to find out if I'm telling the truth. That's getting old after 13 years. I also want to point out that I do not consider myself in any way to be a psychic, a sensitive, or a medium. I am an extra large. Thank you. You're all weak. So, first story we're going to cover takes place right here in the Mauritania room. This room was originally the third-class garden lounge on board the Queen Mary, and like many of our former lounges, this room does get booked for banquet events on occasion. And it was following a banquet event in this room back in 1989. 3 women from our property services staff were dispatched to clean the room. And they arrived and entered through the double doors over on the port side. They noticed when they entered the room that over here on the starboard side, there was a woman sitting in a chair facing the portholes. The woman didn't bother them, so they didn't bother her. They just started cleaning over on the port side, working their way over here to the starboard side. The woman was still there, still sitting in the chair, still looking at the porthole. And one of the ladies from Property Services stepped up to her to ask her to leave the room so they could complete their cleaning. But the woman sitting in the chair did not look at her and did not say anything. There were a few failed attempts asking her to leave the room, and then the woman from Property Services stepped over to the house phone hanging on the wall here, picked it up and dialed the extension to our security department to call for assistance. And as she was explaining the situation to security over the phone, she heard one of her co-workers gasp. And this prompted her to turn around. Now, when she turned around, she noticed that the chair was empty. This lady was finally gone. So she canceled the call with security, hangs up the phone, and then notices her 2 co-workers are now standing off to the side, just staring at the chair. She asked them where the lady had gone, and they said they didn't know, and told her that while she was on the phone with security, this lady had suddenly looked to her left, then to her right, then began to stand up out of the chair, but as she stood up, the image of this woman faded away until she was completely gone. Now, all 3 of them reported seeing this apparition and stated that it lasted for approximately 10 minutes. It is the longest reported sighting that we've ever received on board the Queen Mary. Unfortunately, there is no detailed description of what she looked like contained in that report, other than she was a woman who sat there for about 10 minutes, then disappeared. There is no other description of her. So we cannot identify her based on that description. She's just another mystery right here on board the Queen Mary. Before we continue with our tour, does anyone have any questions so far? All right, moving on.
Thank you.
You just want to turn to the left here, take the stairs down 1 deck. We'll be stopping at the bottom of the stairs.
Awesome. Oops, sorry.
So,
At this point, virtually every nook and cranny on board has a ghost story connected to it, and that does include some of our restrooms. An example of this would be the ladies' room right over here, where there have been reported sightings of what appears to be the ghost of one of our captains or perhaps a ship's officer inside that ladies' room. Before anyone jumps to any conclusions as to why he would show up in the ladies' room, it is probably because that was originally a men's room, and the men's room was originally a ladies' room. They switched them here in Long Beach. The trouble with identifying a ghost of a captain or officer on board the Queen Mary is that there were 33 captains and several hundred officers of various ranks on board throughout the 31 years the ship was at sea. But we do know of 2 who lost their lives due to events that occurred on board this ship. One of them being our very first captain, Commodore Sir Edgar T. Britton, He suffered a stroke up on our bridge in October of 1936 and passed away. And the other one was one of our senior second officers, William Eric Stark. In September of 1949, he accidentally drank carbon tetrachloride on board the ship and would succumb to that accidental poisoning. For those of you now wondering, how does someone accidentally drink dry cleaning fluid? It had been stored in an old gin bottle. It was not related. Now, I personally cannot tell you if it's Stark that's been reported inside this ladies' room, and that is because I have never been inside there to investigate. So, ladies, good luck. We'll be making our way into our fire station display right over here.
You want to investigate? There's only women that can investigate. You can go ahead, Mom.
Let's go with the crowd.
We actually used that bathroom earlier. It was okay. I don't know if we would have gone if we would have known the story.
Someone just went.
So this is one of the Queen Mary's original watertight doors, relocated from the lower decks and placed on display up here. Now the purpose of these doors was to divide our lower decks into watertight compartments. In the event of a hull breach, where the ship hits something and starts to take on water, they close these doors, divide the lower decks into watertight compartments, and hopefully prevent the hull breach from completely flooding the ship. Now, the ship was outfitted with a total of 38 of these doors. To activate these doors, the controls are actually located up on our bridge. During the first 35 seconds of their activation, they would be sounding a warning bell to let crew members down below know that the doors were about to close. After 35 seconds of warning, 700 pounds of hydraulic pressure per square inch would be delivered to these doors. They would slide closed in just 6 seconds. Now, for the most part, these doors were used as a precaution. When the ship was in a situation where they believed the possibility of a hull breach was heightened, they would close the doors just in case. So if she's in fog, rough seas, whenever the ship is in port, these doors were actually closed. And on July 10th of 1966 at 3:50 in the morning, the ship had entered a fog. The watertight doors were closed. About 10 minutes after activating the doors, one of our engineers making his rounds through the aft engine room discovered the body of an 18-year-old crew member caught in one of these doors. Now, the young man was found unconscious but still alive. He was found in a standing position with his arms pinned at his side like this. Now, the hydraulics were released from the door. He was laid down on the deck. Medical staff was dispatched to the area, but by the time medical arrived on the scene, he was turning blue from a lack of oxygen. They did transport him to the closest medical ward, and it was there that he was officially pronounced dead. We don't know how he became caught in the door. There were no eyewitnesses to the accident. Some people believe that he might have been playing a game, jumping back and forth through the door to see how many times he could get through before the door closed. Others say that he might have been rushing to get to the other side of the door as it was closing. Just cut it a little too close. The engineers who worked on board had a theory, and that theory involves this, a lever. Each one of these doors was outfitted with 2 of these levers. You would find one on each side of the door, only it would be mounted closer to the opening of the door. So that lever would be positioned on this side. By activating this lever, once the door was closed, the door would open automatically. Now this allowed crew members access through the doors. Perhaps they needed to get into the next compartment to do their job, or in the event of the hull breach, it offered them a means of evacuating the area that was taking on water. And as long as you held that lever in place, the door stayed open. The moment you let go of the lever, the door would close again. So they think that he might have been using the lever to pass through the door once it was closed and either let go too soon, or it may have slipped from his hand and causing the door to crush him to death. Again, we don't know. What we do know is that we do get reported sightings in that area of the ship of what appears to be the ghost of a young engineer, described as wearing dark blue oil-stained coveralls. He has a beard, wears a white cap, fits the young man's description. We do get reports of disembodied voices throughout that area. Disembodied whistling has been heard. Late at night, our property services staff who have an office one deck above that door have reported hearing screams coming from directly below them when no one should be in the engine room. And during our paranormal investigation tours, it is one of the areas where we have collected a great deal of our better EVPs on board, or electronic voice phenomena. Many of the EVPs that have been recorded in our engine room do appear to be the same voice. So it could be that he is still with us on board the ship, making his presence known from time to time. If you have not yet been to the engine room today, not to fear, I will be giving you directions on how to get there at the end of this tour. If you do want to find Watertight door 13, where the accident occurred, it is on the lowest level of the engine room, all the way at the aft end, next to an escalator that is no longer in operation. So Watertight door, very similar to this one, only painted white with the number 13 on it. And if you do happen to find yourselves in that area at all today, do feel free to say hello to John. Just don't be too terribly surprised if he responds. Right this way. So August of 2012, one of our many tour guides reported that when he entered this area of the ship, from the hotel corridor over here, approaching the third-class main stairway, he saw what appeared to be a man dressed in black, walking up the last few steps of the stairs. Now he said that there was nothing out of the ordinary about this, until that man reached the top of the stairs and disappeared. The tour guide mentioned this to a supervisor later that day, and the supervisor informed him that he may have seen a ghost commonly referred to as the Man in Black. And we're not talking about Johnny Cash here. The supervisor explained that this stairway was responsible for 2 passenger deaths on board the ship. It is one of the steepest passenger stairways on board, but it's also located toward the bow, the front of the ship. Now this is where the roughest ride would be on board, as the bow would rise and then fall with every single wave on the North Atlantic. The Queen Mary encountered some very large waves. The highest one recorded was approximately 90 feet in height. Now with the bow hitting these large waves, it would suddenly rise up. As the ship would climb the wave, the stairs would suddenly become steeper. The trouble is, passengers had no warning when that was going to happen. They would just feel the stairs suddenly become steeper as they were walking up or down. There were times when this stairway was nearly vertical, and passengers did fall to the deck below. 2 of them did not survive their injuries. So it is generally believed that this man in black was one of those passengers. There have been over 24 reported sightings of him on this section of our third-class main stairway here in Long Beach. The tour guide who reported seeing him back in 2012 does still work on board, still does tours, and tells his tour groups about his experience in the third person. It's me. Now that we know how dangerous the stairs are, let's walk down. Hand railings are recommended. On board the ship. Before we enter this area, a couple of things. When I mentioned briefly at the start of the tour that sometimes people go missing, that usually occurs when they wander away from the group while we're in this part of the ship. So again, please stay together. But also watch your step in here. The decks do get a little uneven in places. And to start off with, we're going to make our way to the end of this narrow hallway and then just off to the left. Going to gather briefly in a little lounge area. And as tempting as it is going to be to sit down in the comfortable looking furniture in this lounge, I do have to request that you do not. That furniture does not belong to the Queen Mary. The person it does belong to has requested that tours do not sit in those chairs and sofas. So please don't. You will want to hold the door open as you're passing through, and last one through the door, please make sure it closes behind you. Otherwise, we could get people sneaking up on us. Right this way.
Yes, yeah. Hold.
For those of you wondering why we have this lounge area, this is actually the pre-show lounge for one of our newer attractions on board Queen Mary, Illusions of the Past, a theatrical seance experience hosted by physician and apparitionist Aidan Sinclair. Illusions of the Past is a 90-minute recreation of a Victorian-era stage seance presentation. It's basically a magic show disguised as a seance. And that is held in the Revenant Room just on the other side of this wall. An intimate theater setting, only seats about 50 people. Now, performances of Illusions of the Past at this time are being held Friday and Saturday evenings only, and tickets start at $45 per person. If that sounds like something you might be interested in checking out at any point, please let me know at the end of the tour, and I will give you a coupon for $5 off of each ticket, if you're interested. And now that we've concluded management's mandatory commercial, the real reason we come to this area of the ship is because we are going to be making our way into the forward rope store at the very bow of the ship. To get there, we are going to continue forward through here. We'll go through another door, but immediately on the other side of that door, very steep stairway. Please watch your step and follow me into the bow.
Ba, 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 dun, dun, dun. Hmm?
I was trying to read some of the stuff as you're walking in. You couldn't stop that.
Do, 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 do. Ba, ba, ba. Yep, I'm here. Or am I?
It's actually some decent levels.
So we are now at the bow, the forward end, the front, commonly referred to as the pointy part of the ship. This is our forward rope store, site of the very first management-approved paranormal investigation on board the Queen Mary. And that occurred back in 1988. Prior to the late 1980s, management did not want to discuss the hauntings on board out of the fear that it would scare people away from coming to the ship. But it turns out they were wrong. As the stories got out there, more and more people were coming to the ship because they had heard that the ship was haunted. We saw an increase in attendance. This basically showed management that they had nothing to worry about, so they could relax a little. It was around the same time that management was approached by producers of the TV show Unsolved Mysteries. They wanted to do a segment about the hauntings on board, which would include bringing a paranormal investigation team on board to figure out what was happening on board the ship. And they were given permission to do so. They came on board in September of 1988. They started off by interviewing crew members who had had encounters. One of them was a marine engineer. He had started working on board the ship shortly after the ship arrived here in Long Beach. And for the first couple of months he was on board the ship, he would take the last hour of his shifts just to explore, familiarize himself with the layout of the ship. But it was here in this room that he encountered some strange sounds, including a loud crash that appeared to be coming directly from the bow of the ship. Now this would then be followed by the sounds of metal tearing, water rushing into the ship, the sound of men screaming for help. But he could not figure out where those sounds came from. There was no damage, there was no water, there was no one else around to explain the screams. And he said that he heard these sounds on several occasions, but could never pinpoint where they came from. Now for their investigation, they did set up a lot of equipment in here, including a voice-activated tape recorder, which did capture 2 minutes of those sounds that the marine engineer had described in here. But the investigators couldn't figure out where the sounds came from either. Now, those sounds do continue to occur. We do get them during tours. I have had tour groups of 35 people make their way to the door at the same time when that crash has happened. Quite funny watching 35 people try to fit through such a tiny door at the same time. But many parapsychologists do believe that these sounds are a residual energy, more of an energy from the ship's past that has attached to this area and repeats over and over again. In the Queen Mary's history, there's only one event that could explain those sounds as being a residual energy. And this occurred on October 2nd of 1942. The Queen Mary, serving as a troop ship, was off the coast of Northern Ireland, utilizing a zigzag cruising pattern, changing course every 3 to 7 minutes. That was done to make the ship as difficult to target as possible. Guiding her into Scotland was one of her escort cruisers, the HMS Curaçao. Now, the Curaçao had initially been positioned 5 miles in front of the Queen Mary, but the Queen Mary was a faster ship. The Curaçao could not maintain that 5-mile distance. By about 2 o'clock this afternoon, the Curaçao is now located forward off of our starboard bow. And they do not know which way the Queen Mary is turning next in her zigzag cruising pattern, but they're under the impression that the Queen Mary will steer around them. On board the Queen Mary, they're under the impression that the Curaçao will alter course when they do. So on board the Queen Mary, they maintain that zigzag cruising pattern. 2:08 in the afternoon, they start to make a starboard turn, a right turn in the direction of the Curaçao. The trouble is the Queen Mary's turning radius is about half a mile. It is not clear that the ship is turning immediately. It takes a while. And unfortunately, by the time they realized that the Queen Mary had turned directly for them, it was too late for the Curaçao to alter course. There was a collision. At 2:12 that afternoon, the bow of the Queen Mary struck the Curaçao amidships and cut the smaller vessel in half. In 1 minute, both halves of the Curaçao were in flames. In 5 minutes, the Curaçao sank. This accident killed 338 of the 439 crew members on board. The 101 did survive the collision. They were rescued by other escort cruisers, as the Queen Mary was under strict orders not to stop, otherwise she becomes a sitting target. With 10,000 troops on board, that was a risk they could not take. So the Queen Mary, heavily damaged, continues for Scotland. Her bow
Something's grabbing my back. Something's grabbing my back.
Damage extends below our water line where the Queen Mary suffered an 11-foot hull breach. She did take on water, but luckily, our watertight doors did what they were supposed to do. The Queen Mary did arrive safely in Scotland.
No,
Once
somebody's
their ship
grabbing
was
my back.
unloaded, water was pumped out of the lower decks. Crew went down below to assess the damage from inside, And it is rumored that they may have discovered some of the bodies of the Curaçao's crew in the decks below us. It seems that as the Queen Mary was taking on water, she had also taken on some of the bodies of their crew. So the sounds reported in this area are primarily believed to be a residual energy from that collision. And on occasion, we do get reported sightings of what appear to be men in military uniform in the decks below us through this hatch. The last time this occurred during one of my tours was in September of 2017. Before I said anything about it, I had 7 guests on that tour report seeing a man standing 2 decks below, dressed in a military-style uniform, looking up. By the time I got over there, I didn't see anyone down there. And I thought that maybe it was one of our crew members who might have gone down there, so I called up the 2 departments on board the ship that have access to that area, called up our engineering department. They didn't have anyone down there at that time. They didn't have anyone scheduled to work down there that day. At the time this was reported, our engineering staff was at the opposite end of the ship on their lunch break. And I did call up our security staff to be informed that our security officer who was on board the ship, making his rounds, was on the sun deck at the stern of the ship. Complete opposite end. So what they saw down there was not a Queen Mary crew member. And I don't know what it was. Now, some people think that those sightings might be linked to bodies that were found on board following the wreck with the HMS Curaçao. But many psychic investigators believe that those sightings are connected to POWs that were transported on board the Queen Mary during World War II. The Queen Mary did transport POWs, or prisoners of war, on several occasions. And unfortunately, the records that were kept on board the ship are still sealed. So we don't have a whole lot of information about where POWs were kept on board the ship during the war. Now, we have done interviews with those who sailed on board the ship, and many of them have stated that the POWs transported on board the Queen Mary were actually kept at the stern, back of the ship. But there was also a brig for those who misbehaved. That we don't know its location on board. And many psychic investigators believe that it is in the decks directly below us. So those sightings could be connected to the wreck of the Curaçao. They might be connected to prisoners of war who were transported on the ship. It is something that we cannot really confirm until we have access to the records that were kept on board the ship during the war. And we have no idea when that's going to be.
Excuse me.
Squeeze by you here. So we're going to be leaving this area, and we'll be leaving the same exact way that we came in. So again, please stay together, watch your step, and follow me.
Hasta esos están contabilizados. ¿Cuál? ¿Cuántos tornillos que? ¿Cuántos tornillos que?
Pero malapit siyang ganun. Sa Capri. All the angels.
The Queen Mary is a hotel with 347 hotel rooms on board, many of which do have reports of paranormal activity. The room that is said to be our most haunted is room B340. When the Queen Mary first opened as a hotel in the early 70s, we noticed that we got a lot of complaints about that room. Lights were said to go on and off by themselves. Faucet in the sink in the bathroom would just start running on its own. We had guests complain about continuous knocking on the door in the middle of the night, though there was never anyone there. We had several guests report seeing shadow figures inside the room, the blankets being pulled off of the bed. We did have several guests who experienced the feeling as though someone had climbed into bed next to them and there was no one there. We did have quite a few guests check out of that room in the middle of the night. In 1983, one of our housekeepers cleaning the room had just finished making the bed. She briefly stepped out of the room to the corridor to get towels from her cart and returned to the room to find the bed completely unmade. It startled her so much she quit. At that point, management decided just to stop using B340 as part of the hotel. The room sat vacant for several years. Now, once we started doing ghost tours on board the ship, B340 was a regular stop as part of those tours. And we even did some research into the room, found out that there had been a passenger death in the room back in 1948, and that there had been sightings reported in it since 1958. In 2017, we were informed that we would no longer be allowed to take tours into the room. And that is because its appearance on BuzzFeed's Unsolved, where they stayed in the room overnight. And this subsequently led to our reservations desk getting so many calls from guests who wanted to stay in the room that we decided to capitalize on that. Restored the room, put it back into service. We now charge a premium rate for you to stay in B340. $500 a night starting rate. That can also go up as high as $800 a night, I've heard. It's probably the scariest part of the room these days. Unfortunately, this means we are not going into B340, but we are going to be walking by. It is the very first hotel room in this hallway right over here. It's going to be located on your right-hand side. Just a little hallway leading to two doors. Both doors do lead into the same room. But you'll notice where there should be plaques telling us that that is room B340, those plaques are missing. And a lot of people think we removed the plaques to hide the room's location. But the truth is that people keep stealing the plaques and we're sick of replacing them. So, the very first hotel room in this hallway on your right-hand side with no number plaque is B340, believed to be our most haunted hotel room on board the Queen Mary.
Está feo.
Y con el segundo hijo
Con el segundo está feo.
Oh, it's gross.
Los chocos también está feo.
Oh, it's a swimming pool.
Nope. The ship would have actually been what I'm standing on here. Rubolium or porphyry, combination of rubber and cork. Basically a precursor to linoleum. So, probably the most asked about and most talked about room on board the Queen Mary is the first class swimming pool. Unfortunately, since November of 2016, the most asked about and most talked about room on board the Queen Mary has been inaccessible due to ongoing restoration, meaning that we are not actually going inside the room. We're going to stand out here in front of the original entrance doors and talk about it. Although we did replace the frosted glass that was in the windows here with plexiglass, offering you a little bit of a peek into the room. We also have a couple of photographs showing you a little more detail of the interior off to the side here. The reason it is one of the most asked about rooms on board the ship is due to the amount of paranormal activity reported inside this room. I mentioned briefly at the start of the tour that many psychic investigators believe there is a vortex on board. Not only do they agree on this, they also agree on its location. And it is said to be directly below where we're standing now in the changing rooms of the first class swimming pool. But we also get sightings in here of a woman in a white tennis skirt seen walking down the stairs at the forward end of the room, who disappears on the lower level behind one of the pillars. And there have been reported sightings of a woman in a 1930s style bathing suit who appears at the edge of the swimming pool, dives into it and vanishes. Wet footprints have been reported to materialize alongside the swimming pool. In April of 2010, I was guiding one of our paranormal shipwalk tours through the room, and a guest pointed out to me what appeared to be wet footprints next to one of the ladders coming up out of the pool. And this turned out to be a trail of footprints that led from the pool into the changing rooms, into one of the changing stalls where the trail of footprints ended. So basically what it looked like was that someone had gone for a swim, climbed out of the pool, went to the changing rooms, changed, and went on their way. Except there is no water in our pool. It's been drained since 1992. Now, some of you might be a little confused. When you look through the doors, you can see what appears to be light reflecting off of rippling water in there. That's just a ripple projector. The swimming pool is still drained. That's a special effect. Now, the swimming pool is also where one of our most talked about ghosts tends to show up. We know her by the name Jackie. Now, the name Jackie came to us from one of our former psychic investigators, Peter James. Now, those who have reported seeing her describe her as being a little girl, about 6 to 8 years old. She has curly blonde hair and wears a light blue dress with a white pinafore over it. And a lot of times she's seen peeking out from behind the pillars or up and over the railing of the balcony, sometimes skipping and dancing through the room. On occasion, she is heard laughing, singing, crying inside the room. My very first experience on board the Queen Mary of the paranormal nature was hearing her laugh. Taking a shortcut through the room, I was on the balcony, port side, making my way forward. Just a few seconds before I left the room, I heard a little girl laugh. I stopped and I turned around, and it seemed to me like the laugh came from the entrance to the changing rooms down below us on the starboard side. I figured it was probably another tour guide trying to scare the new guy, so I wanted to figure out who it was. And like the first person to die in a horror movie, I walked toward the laughter. Down the stairs, into the changing rooms, check out all 18 changing stalls, but there's no one there. I'm entirely by myself. Though I do believe that my very first paranormal encounter on board the Queen Mary was hearing Jackie laugh. Now, the general belief with Jackie, because she has a very strong connection to the swimming pool, is that she may have drowned in the pool. The problem is, in all of our research, we have never located a record for anyone drowning on board this ship. Now, some people think that this may have occurred during Operation Diaper, where the ship was transporting war brides and children after the war. So the ship was still under military command, and access to those records, as I mentioned earlier, is pretty limited. So we don't know. We have heard in interviews with those who sailed on board during Operation Diaper that one of the swimming pools might have been used as a laundry area. So it is a possibility, if that is the case, that a little girl could have fallen in during one of those crossings and drowned. It's just something we cannot confirm. So we do refer to this as a rumored drowning. Now, Jackie has been known to show up in other areas. We have had sightings of her in the hotel corridors. There have been sightings of her in the boiler rooms. We get sightings of her in the 4D theater. But most of the sightings and the reports of activity attributed to Jackie takes place here in our first-class swimming pool. Folks, that is going to conclude our Haunted Encounters tour. If you do need to return to the upper decks for another tour, you are welcome to head up the stairs or take the onboard elevator right over here. We started our tour up on Promenade deck. That is level P if you're taking the elevator, or upstairs 4 levels. For those of you who might be wanting to make your way to the engine room, the 4D theater, and the Churchill exhibit, you'll actually exit the ship through the glass doors over here, go up the stairs on the left, all the way to the end of that raised walkway. That'll get you to the engine room, 4D theater, and Churchill exhibit. If you do have any questions or need directions anywhere else, feel free to stick around. But thanks very much for coming aboard the Queen Mary. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you can see it here.
Oh, that's dope.
We have an hour and 10. Let me see what she said.
You can't really see. We're not tall enough. But it's just like where the pool was, and they have those lights to make it look like a